Okay, this is August 8th, 2020, and I'm Kevin Roy. I'm here with Tom Ryan. He's remembering. This is our third attempt at trying to talk about wartime memories about rumors. Now, this is not Fleetwood Mac rumors. This is rumors as in rooms, where people came and actually another term might be boarders because they actually also ate at the house as well. Anyway, so you've got a number of stories about the rumors as they were there. You were a teenager at that time, right?
Right. And I lived there through high school in that house. Uh, you had a picture of the house, and I think that's helpful. It's a white house. We bought it, my folks bought it in about 1942, right at the beginning of World War II. And it cost $8,500. And they worried that they wouldn't be able to make the mortgage payments. The night they signed up for the house, they said they didn't sleep a wink. They just tossed and turned and worried that they had paid too much and they wouldn't be able to make the mortgage payments. A lot of people lost their houses during the Depression and had them repossessed by the bank, and they didn't want that to happen. But this house came up for sale, and it was just next door to Marilyn's house. And so I married the girl next door, 1515 Cornelia Avenue, Waukegan, Illinois. And
Now,
it had,
this is the house next door, right? I mean, this is
yeah, that's Marilyn's house
yeah.
behind my parents. Um,
So it's
Glenn,
right next to this house, right?
yeah. So just west of it, there,
Uh-huh.
that house is west of the house. We lived in the White House, and it had 4 bedrooms. I think that's more. It was a bigger house than any on the block. And I lived up in that peak at the top, really in the attic, but they called it an eave bedroom. And so I could look out the bedroom window and see the street, one window, and of course the ceiling was tapered. So if I got out of bed real fast, I could hit my head on the ceiling.
Yeah.
Um,
See, but the
but
other
I
one,
used that room and I slept there and I studied there for my first year of college at the community college nearby. But we had 4 bedrooms, and the girls had one downstairs, shared one, and my parents shared one downstairs. So there were 5 of us in the house, but they were still worried about paying for it. So here's my 2 sisters when we and my father at a Christmas party at the house, and they're looking into a fireplace. That was a very fancy thing. This house was probably the nicest house on
but
Cornelia Avenue,
but
and
the but the bedroom that was the other Eve bedroom, which was much larger than yours, is
right,
on the
the
left.
other lead bedroom, which would be over there near the chimney, it was much bigger, and my mother said we could rent that room out because during the war there was a real shortage of housing, and there's a need for. They didn't have motels. Motels came after World War II. Holiday Inn was invented in the 50s, and I think then almost every town, even little towns, had a boarding house, and it was usually a widow who whose husband died and left her with some kids, and she had no way of making a living except to rent out the very house that they were buying and pay off the mortgage with the money. It was tough to do, and she would rent out rooms to people. Often single school teachers would live there, and she would feed them. There was a movie during the 30s called uh, Chicken on Sunday. And the idea was that she would serve chicken on Sunday. The only meat you got was on Sunday, and it was chicken. So it was very frugal and very inexpensive for single people to live there. And they didn't have to do housekeeping, and she'd even do their laundry. And the other job that women could get was be an Irish washerwoman, take
But
in people's laundry
yeah,
and
so
do
but
it. So
but
there weren't a
hello,
lot of
yeah,
choices people
but
had.
but your mother was also, she cooked as well as she cooked as well, right? So
Right. So my mother would, we weren't really a rooming house because a rooming house had a dining room table and they fed all the roomers at the dining room table, sometimes 3 meals a day. And that's where the woman that owned it would make the most money and could support her family. And it was all over the country. When you went into a town, you would go to a rooming house, even if you're only going to stay the night. And the quality varied greatly about how clean it was or how nice it was. We see a little of that in the cowboy movies, but they disappeared after World War II. And it was due to people didn't make enough money
can
to own a
we
house.
can we get back to your mother and the house and the rumors?
Right. So my mother wanted to make some money, and rather than go to work, she rented out that 1 bedroom, held 2 people, and she put an ad in the paper, $10 a week. And she got all kinds of applications. Most of them were sailors who had been drafted into the Navy. Yeah, the Navy drafted during World War II. And they came to be trained at Great Lakes Naval Training Station, and often they only stayed there for their training for a short time, but they would be newly married. They didn't know they were going to be drafted, and their wives missed them, and they both wanted to get together. So the wife would come and travel, often the first time she'd ever traveled away from home, and she'd come on the train and come to Waukegan, and they'd rent this room we had up on the second floor. Now, it didn't include eating. My mother didn't feed them. So they'd have to walk down to the couple of blocks to a restaurant and eat their meals there. So they would stay there sometimes a short time, usually until the sailors' um, training was over, and then he'd be shipped overseas and she'd go back home. So I was there for my senior year in high school. So I was, 17 years old. And I remember so many people coming and going, people, and they were from different parts of the country, different kind of people I could talk to them. And I really enjoyed that period in my life. When I was in community college, I would study in my room with the ceiling, and I was home a lot. Anyway, these women would be in the house, and they didn't have anything to do except sit in their bedroom and wait for their husband to get off duty and come on the bus from Great Lakes and come out to the west side of Waukegan. Well, they would come in and sit in the kitchen and talk to my mother. My mother would, mother them. They were homesick, many of them. I remember one girl, she was so homesick. She was from South Dakota. And so she just really, my mother was so kind and helpful to her and got her through the homesickness. I remember one night, a couple, he was an embalmer in a funeral home. And when he got drafted, of course, he wasn't an embalmer in the Navy. He had some other job, but he was older, and they were a little older than a lot of these kids that were just got married out of high school and then got drafted. So he had duty on New Year's Eve. He had to stay at Great Lakes and be on duty. So his wife was there with me, and my parents went over to my aunt's house. We had aunts living within a couple of blocks of our house, several of them, and they'd go over to one of the aunts and have a New Year's Eve party. And so they left me at home, I guess, kind of to take care of my 2 sisters. But anyway, I stayed up until midnight with this woman who was older than I was, and she was so nice to me. She treated me like an adult, and we just had a talk and we played games. And I don't remember her name, but because I then at the next year I went to college, and I went away to the University of Illinois at Urbana, and I wasn't there for a lot of this, but I'd come back in summers, and my mother continued to rent the room. Once at the end of World War II, we had a man named Rabovetti who had been a sailor who joined the Navy at 17 right out of school and went to the Bataan. He was in the Philippines, and when the Japanese captured the Philippines, he was captured and was in the death march back to Japan, where many of them died in the march, and he survived. And when he got out of the Navy, in gratitude for what he went through, they made him an ensign. So all of a sudden, he was an officer. Well, he was not 17 anymore, but he had this beautiful ensign's uniform on, and he'd walk up the street every night from Great Lakes and to meet his wife. And she had red hair, and they were the Grabovettis, and she lived in Gillespie, Illinois, and they had Amish people there, and she knew all about the Amish, and she taught me about that. I just would sit at the dinner table. Well, we ate in the kitchen, and we didn't eat in the dining room. That was too fancy. And the kitchen was pretty small. So 5 of us had to get around the table. And I remember I'd be plastered against the wall, and I could pass me the potatoes, and they'd be on a counter off the table, and I'd have to bring them over so everybody could have the potatoes. That was, I'm never sure why I guess it was more comfortable. And my mother would be cooking, I guess, and she could just continue talking and cooking and then feeding us all. And Mrs. Rabovetti said she was really a good cook, and she would like to fix some Italian. She wasn't Italian, but her husband was, and pick some Italian dishes for him. And my mother said, yeah, okay, after we're done eating, we'll leave the kitchen to you, and you can have it. And he got off duty later anyway, and so they'd eat a late supper, and she would cook for them, Mrs. Rabovetti. And so I would sit in the kitchen and talk to her and listen to her stories about Gillespie, Illinois, and she knew so many things that I didn't know about, and I can remember them as a family. Then he would come home, and I would disappear, and they would eat their dinner together in our kitchen, and then they'd go up the stairs to their bedroom, and I don't know what they did up there, but they were there for the rest of the evening. So that would happen over and over with these people. As the war ended, and of course he was a prisoner of war, so it was after the war that they were there. We continued renting out that room because there was a housing boom going on, but there was a need for many houses as GIs wanted to have children, and they were moving into these new homes as fast as they could build them. So there was still a need for these our rooming house. It wasn't a room and board, a boarding house, they called those, the ones where they serve meals. This was just a room, one room. But we did meet a lot of different people. When the the Navy people ended, we had nurses. They were cadet nurses. They were just out of high school. They had passed the test, and they got a scholarship to St. Teresa Hospital in Waukegan, Illinois. And some of them were from the farm. They'd never been away from home before. But there was such a shortage of nurses that the government paid for their education, paid St. Teresa Hospital to train them, and then paid them for room and board and their books and tuition and so on. So they got a free education, and in 2 years they were RNs. And then they would leave us, and we'd get another 2 girls. So we had several of those. They were on at the end of the war and on after the war ended. And they were always interesting because they were often closer to my age than the Navy wives, and I would get to know them. So I really enjoyed that experience in our lives. And they would often share like Christmas Eve with us, and because they weren't at home and they were very homesick. So we tried to bring them into our family for the short time that they were with us. So they were more than just $10 a week, but it did help my parents pay off the mortgage. And then my mother died, and my father sold the house, and I think he got quite a bit more for it than they had paid for it, and we were able to pay off the mortgage, and he bought another home back with the 2 bedrooms that was more appropriate to a widower. So we had that house for about 20 years, and it was really a lot of different things happened there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, thank you for the stories. And that was also probably your first exposure to people that had been abroad outside of the United States and had traveled around and really opened up a lot of new ways of thinking, a real education as well. Yeah. So,
Right.
thank you very much
Yes.
for all those
Yes.
good stories.
Enjoyed that.